Welcome to The Debate. Our immediate focus today is on the strategic Arctic region and a pretty profound liability that's emerging from the height of the Cold War. We're talking about the rediscovery and, well, the physical exposure of Camp Century deep beneath the rapidly melting Greenland ice sheet.
And the situation on the ground is stark. Current intelligence seems to confirm a reality that's shifting very, very quickly.
It is. NASA radar testing has recently captured these incredibly clear, high-resolution images of the remnants of Camp Century. Now, for those who might not recall the context, this wasn't just some small outpost. This was a massive subterranean military installation built in the late 50s under the 1951 Greenland Defense Agreement between the U.S. and Denmark.
It was basically an underground town.
Exactly. An engineering marvel, really, for its time. It was built about 30 meters beneath the ice, housed up to 200 personnel, and sprawled across a site that's, roughly 2.4 by 2.4 kilometers. And its core purpose was tied to a secret Cold War project, Project Iceworm, which was an attempt to set up a mobile missile launch system right under the ice. I mean, a real testament to that era's focus on hard power projection.
And the reason this is a geopolitical alarm bell today is what was left behind when they abandoned it in 1967.
Right? The inventory is just staggering. We're talking about nearly 9,200 tons of abandoned physical waste, building debris, old equipment, you name it. Plus, a huge amount of liquid fuel, 200,000 liters of diesel.
But the real kicker is the toxic stuff.
Yeah, that's where the threat really escalates. We've got significant concentrations of PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, which were common in Cold War materials and are, notoriously toxic and persistent. And even more concerning is the radiological risk. The site had a small, portable nuclear reactor, the PM2A, and the waste from its cooling system is still down there. We're looking at an estimated 1.2 billion becquerels of radioactivity.
And the core assumption back then, the very reason they felt they could just walk away, was that the Greenland ice sheet was permanent, a permanent tomb.
Yes, that was the operational calculus. They thought the material would be safely entombed for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, long enough for the radioactive material to decay. But of course, current climate science has completely invalidated that premise.
Completely. The accelerating ice melt means we're now facing the risk of these toxins being released maybe within decades, not millennia.
And that transition from a sort of hypothetical future problem to an accelerating material threat is what creates this dual security dilemma for us today.
Which forces us to ask the central question. Is the paramount concern here the immediate physical and logistical challenge of containing this massive environmental hazard? Something that demands an urgent, almost military-grade response? Or is the greater long-term threat actually the strategic and diplomatic fallout from this revealed liability and the profound instability it injects into that crucial U.S.-Denmark-Greenland relationship?
I see why you frame it as a strategic failure, but from my perspective, from an operational point of view, the physical danger is the security risk. I mean, when you look at the sheer scale of it, the 9,200 tons of debris, the 200,000 liters of diesel, plus the radiological component, it just demands immediate, high-level technical remediation. This is an unprecedented engineering salvage operation in an extremely difficult environment. I think preventing a physical catastrophe is the urgent security matter here.
I come at it from a different angle. While that waste is, undeniably dangerous, the exposure of this forgotten pollution is primarily a strategic and legal disaster. It undermines American legitimacy in the region. It creates this profound diplomatic instability because it places a huge financial, environmental, and political burden directly on Denmark and Greenland. And maybe most damagingly, it just hands undeniable geopolitical leverage to rivals. I'm thinking specifically of Russia and China, who are already trying to paint the United States as an irresponsible polluter, not a security guarantor.
Okay, but let's drill down into the operational difficulty for a second. If we accept that this waste has to be removed, and frankly, I don't see a responsible alternative, the logistics are just staggering. We aren't dealing with a consolidated landfill. You've got this complex, winding, branched tunnel system, complete with old infrastructure, that's currently under a dynamic, moving ice sheet.
It's not just buried, it's flowing.
Exactly. The sheer weight of the ice creates what's called ductile flow. So the tunnels themselves are collapsing, they're twisting, shearing the waste fields. Even with our best subsurface radar, mapping and accessing all that waste, which is now fractured and dispersed, is going to be incredibly difficult and dangerous.
And this isn't the only site, is it?
No, and that's the other layer of complexity. Current intelligence suggests Camp Century is just one of at least 5 former U.S. base locations near Thule Air Force Base that are still under the ice. So this could just be the opening chapter of a much bigger cleanup challenge.
Right.
And now, think about the time factor. It's crucial. Ice dynamics, the flow, the snow accumulation, the melt, it all means this liability is a moving target. If we delay, the models predict that the solid waste could be buried as deep as 67 meters, and the liquid waste, the really nasty diesel and PCBs, could be down at 93 meters by 2090. Every single year of delay makes recovery exponentially more costly and complex. This requires a national, strategic-level deployment. You can't just outsource it.
I agree. The scale is immense, and the PCBs are a huge long-term biohazard. They accumulate in the Arctic marine food chain, which is, the primary diet for indigenous Greenlandic populations. So it is an immediate public health and sovereignty crisis. But I just don't buy that we can sustain an effort of the scale you're describing, a multi-decade, multi-billion-dollar salvage operation, without first resolving the underlying legal and financial ambiguity. The inability to execute a fast, decisive cleanup because of legal gridlock, well, that is the very definition of a strategic liability. The U.S. presence, which was meant to guarantee security, is now creating a long-term contamination risk for the very region it's supposed to protect. And politically, that just weakens the U.S. strategic position against competitors who are eager to paint the Americans as irresponsible.
We can debate the political optics, but the laws of thermodynamics and the movement of that ice sheet aren't going to wait for international lawyers to finish their arguments. The environmental degradation itself poses a hard security risk. That 200,000 liters of diesel and PCBs leaching into the meltwater, that's eventually going to impact the global ocean conveyor belt. We are talking about a physical tipping point.
But the material problem is completely entangled with the legal complexity, the hidden hands of diplomacy, right? The responsibility for cleanup is fiercely disputed between the U.S., Denmark, and an increasingly autonomous Greenland. The 1951 Defense Agreement, it didn't account for climate change. It didn't envision Greenland's move towards self-governance.
Right.
The agreement just says U.S. assets could be moved or disposed of after consultation. So the core legal ambiguity is whether abandoned toxic pollution counts as a movable asset under that Cold War treaty language. This legal uncertainty is what's actively delaying action, and that's precisely what makes the contamination risk you're talking about even worse.
That's an interesting point, though I guess I'd frame the strategic nightmare a bit differently. For me, the failure isn't primarily the debate over who pays. It's the physical certainty that this contamination is going to happen, and it will destabilize the region no matter what the legal framework says. Prioritizing the legal arguments over the imminent physical danger is exactly the kind of bureaucratic paralysis the U.S. cannot afford in the high north.
But failing to address that legal vacuum gives a profound gift to our rivals. I mean, when the U.S. tries to assert control over Greenland, citing national security concerns against Russian and Chinese activity, well, that argument is severely undermined by this legacy of environmental abandonment. State media from our rivals has already highlighted this, framing the U.S. presence not as a security shield, but as a liability that threatens indigenous populations. This contradiction is being leveraged right now to push Denmark and Greenland into difficult positions, potentially weakening NATO's northern flank. That environmental debt is now a soft power weapon.
I fully recognize the diplomatic cost. I do. But the priority has to be operational stabilization. The strategic imperative isn't diplomacy first, it's prevention of systemic failure. We have to treat the cleanup like we would a massive transboundary oil spill, a necessary cost of maintaining stability. Failure to act swiftly, regardless of the legal mess, it sends a signal of weakness and inaction, which rivals can exploit even more effectively.
I agree. Inaction is dangerous, but funding a massive unilateral cleanup without resolving the 1951 agreement, that sets a costly and potentially unsustainable precedent. It tacitly validates this idea of we'll act now and discuss liability later, which is exactly the kind of behavior that worries autonomous Arctic nations. We have to balance the material cleanup with establishing a sustainable, collaborative governance framework that actually includes Greenland as an equal partner.
Collaboration is essential, I agree, but the window for a cost-effective cleanup is closing as that waste sinks deeper and gets more dispersed. This is fundamentally an issue of physics, and physics is now driving the geopolitical timetable.
So, okay, let's look at how this all plays out. The next 6 months. There are a few possible scenarios.
The worst case, I think, is pretty clear. Persistent legal and political gridlock. The countries keep disputing liability. Maybe it goes to international mediation, which just delays everything. No remediation plan gets funded. The melt accelerates, the pollutants are exposed, and you have the first major international dispute directly caused by climate change exposing forgotten pollution. That would fracture the Western Alliance's position in the Arctic.
And on the other end, the best case scenario, that would require some pretty decisive leadership. Under pressure from Russia and China's increased presence, the U.S. acknowledges the need for regional stability and commits to funding the initial scientific phase, that comprehensive radar mapping, jointly with Denmark and Greenland. It sidesteps the thorny legal question for now, but it demonstrates good faith.
And I think the most likely case is somewhere in the middle. It avoids both the total fracture and a huge public commitment. Pressure from Greenlandic authorities plus intelligence on rival narratives forces Washington to quietly accelerate subsurface mapping and modeling. They'll want to predict exactly where that moving liability will be in 2090. It's quiet, technical action that manages the political optics while they gather the data for what will be an inevitable large-scale operation down the line.
Can't plan the salvage until you know where the liabilities will be in 50 years.
Ultimately, Camp Century serves as this profound marker of how Cold War strategic assumptions, especially that the Arctic ice was permanent, have been completely invalidated. This requires a total reassessment of long-term strategic liabilities, not just in Greenland, but across every permafrost and glacial region worldwide.
That's absolutely right. This debate really confirms that the Arctic is now a theater where environmental threats and classic geopolitical competition are just inextricably linked. The situation demands simultaneous solutions to both hard power logistics and soft power diplomacy. The material definitely demands further scrutiny. We'll continue to monitor the movements around Thule.